Welcome back to the Adventist History Podcast. This is your bonus episode for April 2021, and happy that you're joining us again. Now, in this episode, we're going to be responding to Steve Daly's controversial book called Ellen G. White, a Psychobiography. So this should be fun. I'm calling this episode The Daly, Part 1, just a little throwback to that Daly controversy in the early 20th century in the church. Thought I was being clever, but you probably didn't get it, so I'm really not clever. Anyways, let's just move on. All right. For those who are arriving fashionably late to this party, don't know what on earth is going on here, let me explain. Steve Daly was an Adventist pastor, teacher, author for about 35 years before he was apparently fired in 2010. Okay, don't know why, don't ask. He has a master's degree in history from Loma Linda University, a doctorate from Claremont in church history, and another doctorate in psychology from Alliant University. Have no idea where that is, but there you go, one master's, two doctorates. He now works at UCLA as a psychologist, I believe, and he's also a non-denominational church pastor. All right, now he has focused on Ellen White throughout his career, both his master's and as I understand it, his doctorates as well are focused on Ellen White. And so since leaving the church, he's published this latest book here, came out in, I think, late 2020, called Ellen G. White, a Psychobiography. Now, this book first came to my attention, and probably that of many other Adventists, probably yours if you're familiar with it, when Adventist Today released an interview with Steve Daly on their website. It was hugely controversial, with many prominent Adventists calling out Adventist Today for conducting what they considered to be a somewhat soft interview. All right, they allowed Daly to make his claims without much pushback, without much of a challenge. My guess is that Today probably didn't realize that this was as controversial as it was going to end up being. My guess is they just, because there's no real evidence that they prepared. I think it was the chairman of the board conducted the interview with Steve Daly, and then there was somebody else in it as well. And they didn't come armed to the interview, okay? They didn't bring like Adventist historians on to be a part of this conversation as well. They just wanted to talk to the guy about his book because, hey, it's about Adventists and he's a former Adventist. And my guess is they were blindsided by the reaction. Probably shouldn't have been, but were. So I don't think they were trying to do anything, trying to be intentional about stirring stuff up. I just think they didn't realize what they were dealing with. So anyways, since then, several Adventist scholars have interacted with him on Adventist Today, and they've written in their letters to the editor, and he's responded to them. And as a result, a couple of you listeners have asked me to respond. All right, this is not a book review. I'm not going to give you the pros and cons and summarize the chapters and all that. This is a book response. So here I am. Okay, just understand that this is not my preference. While I definitely have a critical or snarky side, which you're probably about to see, I enjoy a good argument. But when it comes to spiritual things, I have studiously avoided making that a feature of my faith. I would much rather talk about how awesome the Sabbath is than to tell somebody else how terrible Sunday is. But, since you asked me to respond, I guess I can do that. All right, now let's cut to the chase. Here is the major argument of Daly's book in Daly's own words. I'm quoting here. When all the evidence is in, a strong case can be made that the prophetess may have been one of the most significant con artists in history. End quote. The book follows the life of Ellen White, showing how she tricked, bullied, and lied to people in the interest of, well, I'm not precisely sure what Daly thinks that she was after. I mean, clearly she wanted some power. Clearly, she was reacting to some early childhood trauma. Okay, I get that. But this is his point, right? This is his point, that she was one of the most successful con artists in history. Daly has set for himself from the beginning an extraordinarily difficult challenge. Extraordinarily difficult. Because he has to prove that she is not just a fraud, not just that she had some secret life, secret sinful life, not just that she was a bad person. He has to prove that she was one of the most successful con artists in history. And upon that basis, he absolutely and utterly fails to prove that argument, in my opinion. Now, before I go further, I think it's important for Adventists who are listening to check their own motivation in responding to claims like this. Okay, I had to ask myself, am I coming to this conclusion because this guy is attacking my tribe? Am I coming to this conclusion because I need Ellen White in my life and I cannot bear the thought of someone discrediting her? Questions like that. You get the idea. It's important that we are acting out of a sense of integrity and not just offering some kind of emotional response to being threatened. Not just some kind of visceral, instinctive response. It's easy to get defensive. Adventists are professionals at getting defensive. And we can end up focusing on winning the argument. Man, that's never been said about us before, has it? Okay? Steve Daly isn't wrong because he questions Ellen White. He isn't wrong because he left the Adventist Church. Adventists have played this game in the past, right? Conradi leaves the church, and the church's go-to response, the go-to response for decades is, look, everyone who has ever separated themselves from this church has not prospered. No one has ever gone on to form a better church, a church that grows faster, that does more than our church. Ergo, you are wrong for leaving the church. You are discredited. We're not going to listen to you, and so on. And to that I would respond, was Ellen White wrong to leave the Methodist Church? Is this really the road we want to go down? Where you're right if you stay in the church, or at least you have a chance of being right if you stay in, but you're automatically disqualified. We don't have to listen to you if you leave. I don't buy that. I think in the true Protestant tradition, we have to be willing to listen to people who are trying to correct us. We have to listen to the Luthers. We have to listen to the Ellen Whites, and people who have to step outside, who feel compelled to step outside the organization in order to speak to us. All right, they may be wrong, but we have to listen to them. And I think so long as people like Steve Daly are arguing in good faith, right? They're not just throwing hand grenades. They're honestly, they're convicted about what they believe, and they're honestly trying to make a case. Then I think that they deserve our consideration. Okay? He is a man whom Jesus loves, and we have to remember that as we respond. So, if you're tuning in because you want to hear me nail this guy, then just go find something else to listen to. Go find a better use of your time. If you're tuning in because you want me to defend your faith from this barbarian at the gates, I'd urge you to find a better use of your time. I am not here to save St. Ellen. I'm here to consider Mr. Daly's claims and evaluate them on the basis of Adventist history as best I can. Okay? I'm not a psychologist, so I have very little to say about his claims there. We're just going to be focusing on the history. Okay. Next, I want to talk about the nature of this book. What kind of book is it? Daly calls it a psychobiography, which is a subgenre of psychohistory, where the author focuses on the psychological makeup of their subject rather than, say, the names and dates and ideas that they were that they were involved with. Erik Erikson's Young Man Luther, which was published in 1958, probably the best known example of this subgenre. Erikson was famously disinterested in Luther's theology as much as most church historians are, right? Church historians tend to focus on the theological ideas, what separated Luther from Rome, that kind of stuff. And he didn't care so much. He focused on how Luther's early relationship with his father impacted his later relationship with Rome. Ericsson's approach to Luther was both polarizing and intriguing, as you can probably guess. Ericsson's point that Luther related to his church similarly to how he related to his father, right? The Catholic Church was and is a paternal institution. And this point has merit, but I think the question is how much merit? This is the weakness, in my opinion, of psychobiography. In the absence of being able to study the subject directly, how strong can your conclusions be? Right? The psychobiographer is forced to make leaps of faith over the knowledge gap in the historical record. And that's not insignificant. And I think the thing that really must be kept in mind here is if we're going to respect psychology as a science, and we're going to trust ourselves going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist for help, right? We place our trust in them, that the more we open up and disclose of ourselves to them, the more that they can help us sort through that. But Luther is not voluntarily disclosing himself to a professional. Neither is Ellen White. They can't ask questions of them directly. And so the information they have is, this isn't really psychology, I guess, in the sense that, it's filtered. It's filtered through time. It's filtered through culture. And you have all of these. And you're not able to, in a private, intimate session, have somebody who's willing to open up to you. And so, to me, it's just like it's diagnosing a patient you don't have. And I think there's ethical concerns there. I'm not saying this book is unethical on those grounds. I'm just saying that's a conversation we probably need to have about this subgenre. I just don't think it's as valuable as, say, seeing a psychologist in person. Let's just put it that way. I don't think the conclusions you reach can be as strong. All right. Daly makes these leaps of faith with Ellen White. Let me give you an example of what I mean. All right. First, some background for those who don't know. At the age of 9, Ellen White's hit in the face with a rock in a horrible accident, knocked her unconscious for a few weeks, and it deeply upset her, as you can imagine. Ellen Harmon by birth, also has a twin, Elizabeth, who was uninjured. Daly says, well, hey, let's compare Ellen Harmon with her twin sister. By holding up Elizabeth as the control in this little experiment, this will show us how the mental trajectory of young Ellen Harmon was changed by this incident. Okay, are you with me so far? This is what he's trying to do. The problem is that the conclusions Daly reaches far outpace the evidence. He writes that Ellen suffered, quote, significantly more depression than her twin, end quote, and that this incident made Ellen more of an attention seeker than her twin. And Daly writes that Ellen White became more spiritual than her twin as a result of this accident. Okay, but we have no way of knowing whether any of this is true because we know so very little about Elizabeth. If you had Ellen and Elizabeth in a lab as kids and then studied them every few years or so, then you could bring some weight to this argument. But there's simply no way to know how that rock incident changes Ellen Harmon. Maybe Ellen was always more spiritual than Elizabeth, and the rock had nothing to do with their different trajectories in life. Maybe Ellen was always more prone to depression than Elizabeth. Maybe Ellen learned to be more attention-seeking because she was the youngest of 8 children, and that's what some younger children do. Maybe some trauma also happened to Elizabeth that we don't know about, and that changed Elizabeth's life as well and put her on a different trajectory. And so we'd end up comparing Ellen to that trajectory Elizabeth went on. I'm just saying there's so many unknowns. Daly could be right. I don't know, and he doesn't know. And there's no way to know. It's just conjecture. So you have to take these leaps of faith here. And, I think it's unwise to hold Elizabeth up as the person Ellen should have been. Okay? Don't get me wrong. I do think that a traumatic incident like that probably did affect Ellen's development. I've worked with people who have undergone trauma, And it does change you. It does. But, it's hard to predict the ways in which it will change you. So it's hard to, I just don't think you can look at Elizabeth and say, this is who Ellen should have been. Because even though they were twins, not identical, but even though they were twins, they're still different people. And it's hard to say. I do agree, as Daly notes, that Ellen had to drop out of school and Elizabeth didn't. And, and I'm sure that also affected Ellen. Maybe, she was part of the reason why she took up writing. And, she kind of wanted to, be involved, I guess, to kind of make up for her lack of education by reading and writing and, really hitting the books. I don't know. Even in saying that, I don't know for sure. It's hard to say. So, no doubt she was affected by the incident, but the question is how exactly, and none of us can answer that question. And I just think Daly is simply more confident than I believe the evidence permits anyone to be. I do. Because I think the tendency, and we all do this no matter what field you're in, the tendency is you have a type and you want to fit your subject into that type. Well, the problem is you don't have a lot of evidence usually. So basically you kind of look for some salient points of evidence. You say, this fits this type. And then you just kind of, you don't have evidence that fits the rest of the types. But so you just kind of say, well, this was probably true and probably true and probably true until it fits your model. All right. Moving on from the genre of the book, I want to spend just a moment on one troubling aspect of, I don't know what to call it, the quality control process here. Daly has assembled an impressive readers group for this book, consisting of psychiatrists, historians, pastors, and others, from prominent former Adventists like Ron Numbers and Dale Ratzlaff to prominent Adventists like John Butler and Gil Valentine. It's an impressive assembly of advisors meant to give this book that sheen of impartiality, as if the author carefully solicited input from specialists on both sides and came to a considered conclusion. But I question how true that is, because in his acknowledgement section, Daly thanks the readers group who, quote, took the time to give me valuable input that I was able to carefully consider and implement into the final draft of this book, end quote. Now, John Butler has already gone on record at A Today saying that he has serious problems with this book. Gil Valentine has left a 1-star review for the book on Amazon, noting, and I quote, although one of those named in the list of readers, I did not, in fact, offer any feedback. I also know of others in the list who chose not to respond to the manuscript, end quote. So Daly makes it look like he got valuable feedback from both sides, but at least some on the Adventist side are saying, hey, we didn't offer any feedback to him, and there's stuff in this book that we object to, so don't attach our names to it. Paraphrasing them there, okay? And that's really strange, because the central argument of this book is that Ellen White is a fraud, and we don't even get into the first page before we find an example of Daly, thanking these people who gave him valuable input that he was able to carefully consider and implement into the final draft of this book. And we're finding out that at least some of the Adventists, half of them, most of them, I don't know, never gave any feedback at all, but there they are, thanked for their feedback. Yeah, and this book is about how Ellen White is a fraud. Okay, we haven't even gotten to page 1 yet, guys. I want to say one more thing about this book, and that is, for a lack of a better word, its character. If this book were a person, what kind of person would it be? Character consists of elements like the book's tone, its vocabulary, its writing style, its argumentation, so on. This is where I am most disappointed in this book. As the old saying goes, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And in my view, Daly enjoys being disagreeable. He bombards the reader with provocative claims about the credibility of James and Ellen White in the early chapters of the book without bothering to stop and prove them. He tells us that they will be explained later, but it often feels like just a cheap shot. Okay? For example, chapter 1, second paragraph. Daly gives us these 3 sentences. Listen carefully here. And here it is. Sentence 1. They, meaning Ellen's parents, were both busy parents who may not have had the time to give each of their 8 kids the attention they may have desired. Sentence 2. We will say more about Ellen's need for attention in particular in the next chapter. Sentence 3. But for now, we can say that all the kids were taught to be responsible and to help out with family chores and duties. You'll notice that you can go from sentence 1, about how Ellen's parents were busy, to sentence 3, about how the kids were taught to be responsible, without losing anything in terms of the logical flow here. Sentence 2, that little comment about Ellen's need for attention that he's going to talk about in the later chapter, adds nothing of value to this paragraph, except just to take a quick shot at Ellen White. For the Adventist reader, or I would hope any reader who cares about quality biography, this habit is a nuisance. A few paragraphs later, Daly writes, quote, as we will see in the chapters to come, a self-righteous need to justify herself would follow Ellen her entire lifetime, end quote. Look, an author has the right to foreshadow, to connect something in an early chapter with something that won't be fully explained until later on. That's fine. But both of these sentences in chapter 1 are completely unnecessary from the point of view of the argument. You can delete them and nothing would change. Nobody would be confused. But, like some critical information has been lost or something. Nobody would be confused. Okay? Now, Daly is not an exceptionally good writer, but neither is he a poor one. He does not include many superfluous sentences like this in his book. So I must conclude that they are present purely as gratuitous shots at his subject, and by association, all who may hold her in regard. Now, in one case, he includes more than a superfluous sentence. For no fathomable reason, he brings up the accusation that Ellen White was a secret Freemason, despite her hard condemnation of that group. In context, he is discussing the Harmon family being kicked out of their Methodist church for having joined William Miller's crew. We'll talk about that more in a minute. See, there's some foreshadowing. Daly then tells us that no one can know the day or the hour of Jesus' return. Jesus' own words from Matthew 25. Okay, whatever. Then Daly begins a new paragraph like this. Topic sentence first. Here we go. Quote, this should make it clear that date setting is a heresy and something that the Methodist Church was right to reject. That was a topic sentence. Here we go. William Miller was also suspected of holding heretical beliefs as a Freemason, a secret society he belonged to, but claimed to leave in 1831. However, membership in Freemasonry was considered to be irrevocable, given that they took vows for life. To what degree key leaders, including Ellen White, were influenced by this heresy is unclear. End quote. And then he quotes some old accusations that Ellen White was a Mason, despite all of those statements she made against the Masons. But my point here is that the topic sentence of this paragraph is that date setting is a heresy and the Methodist Church was right to reject the Harmon family. Next sentence, and William Miller was a Freemason, though he claimed to have left the Masons. But they took vows for life, so maybe he never really left. And maybe he influenced Ellen White with his Masonic ideas. Wait, what? I mean, none of this Mason stuff has anything to do with the topic sentence of this paragraph, which is about date setting. Daly just shoves this Mason stuff in here for no decent purpose. For no decent purpose. Seriously, what purpose does this paragraph serve? What are you alleging? Notice that he writes, to what degree key leaders, including Ellen White, were influenced by this heresy is unclear, when he never bothered to demonstrate that William Miller was still a Mason, was still teaching Masonic doctrines, or that Ellen White was influenced at all by these doctrines. He doesn't say if Ellen White was influenced by these Masonic ideas. He says to what degree she was influenced is unclear. How about no degree? How do we know she was influenced to any degree? He assumes she was influenced to at least some degree, but he can't say how much. I mean, just the leaps of logic here are just astounding. Just astounding. William Miller claimed he left the Masonic people, the order, in 1831, more than 10 years before the Great Disappointment. And yes, okay, he took vows for life. What does that even mean? I mean, like, what is this conspiracy that you are alleging here, man? And then Daly shares a paragraph of reasons why some people, whenever told who accuses Ellen White of being a Mason, why they think Ellen White was a Mason. Okay, they give 6 reasons. And after those 6 reasons, Daly writes, quote, like most negative accusations lodged against Ellen White and her leadership, these concerns have been denied and dismissed by the prophet's apologists, end quote. Notice that Daly isn't concerned to prove whether or not these accusations are true. No, he just brings them up and basically says, of course, Ellen's friends deny it, as if that makes them guilty of something. Is it a crime to deny something you find untrue? Daly is judging Ellen White and her defenders on this count of association with Freemasonry without ever alleging that it's actually true. I mean, it's just aggravating. It's like saying, some people are saying that the Adventist History Podcast caused COVID to spread through people's phones into their ears. And then I say, that's ridiculous. I had nothing to do with that. That doesn't even work that way. And then you say, well, of course he would deny it. What kind of voodoo is this dude on? These 2 paragraphs about Freemasons can be deleted and nothing would change in this book because Daly never deals with this subject again. Oh, I'm getting a little worked up. Pray for me. Oh, look, on another subject, the reader can't help but notice that Daly insists upon putting quotation marks. This one's just a little pet peeve. He puts quotation marks around the word vision whenever he is talking about Ellen White having a vision. Quote unquote vision every single time. Look, I'm fine if he doesn't want to believe the visions are real, but do you have to put quotes around it every single time? Like, I've read plenty of commentaries in Revelation, you probably have too, by authors who don't believe that a guy named John actually had visions from God. And they use the word vision just fine in their commentaries without putting quotes around it every single time. And the reader is not dumb. The reader knows that they don't agree that John actually had visions, right? Like, maybe they make that clear at some point. And then you just read on, and you're smart enough to know that the author is not necessarily agreeing with everything that John saw or wrote down. Like, we're smart enough to figure that stuff out. All these quotes seem to do in Daly's book is just emphasize the author's contempt for the idea that Ellen White had visions. It's just another opportunity for Daly to show disdain, to be disagreeable. Now, it's this lack of rhetorical restraint, this unnecessary sniping that I believe dooms his entire project from the start. I mean, really, I think it was doomed when he set the bar as one of the most successful con artists in history. I mean, charge somebody with a crime that you can prove. That's what I say. I mean, it's, if you catch a shoplifter, don't charge him with murder because you're not going to be able to prove it and they're going to get set free. Like, you don't set the bar so high. All right. Anyways, I think it's doomed from that point. But the character of the book, the toxic tone that he takes on, I think also just dooms this thing from the start. This intentionally abrasive style is unbecoming of the ambition of this work. The character of this book, from its pretensions of psychological professionalism to its loaded language to its toxic tone, all of it turns me off. And I don't say that as somebody who's opposed to the idea of this book. I'm fine if somebody wants to write a psychohistory of Ellen White. I'm fine if an economist wants to study her. I'm fine if a business person wants to study her from whatever professional angle you want. Go for it. We'll all be the better for an honest and thorough study from all these different angles. Don't have any problem with the psychobiography part of it. But I think his work is self-defeating in the sense that now, if a psychologist, be they Adventist or not Adventist, wants to do a psychobiography of Ellen White, this is where the bar is set. This is the bad taste that's going to be in people's mouth as they contemplate funding that project or contemplate the reception of that project, the readership of it. This is what they're going to be thinking of. He wants you, that is Steve Daly, he wants you to believe that this book is a dispassionate, professional evaluation of Ellen White's mental health. It's what he calls classic psychobiography, except he wrote in one place that it contains a, quote, sprinkling of anecdotal, theological, and ethical comments, as well as some personal reflection, end quote. That, I believe, is a ridiculous understatement. Daly's personal, theological evaluation is all throughout this book. It's often more prominent than the psychological element, as we have seen and will continue to see. Okay, in one part, he writes, quote, Joseph Bates, our old friend Joseph Bates, convinced the whites of his 7-year theory that Christ would return exactly 7 years after the Great Disappointment. But when their 7-year theory failed to be fulfilled and Christ did not return on October 22nd, 1851, the whites went into a major cover-up mode, end quote. Oh, look, it's not a secret that Joseph Bates was setting dates. Bates with the dates. I like that. Hey, we should make a song about that. That's not a secret. He did expect Jesus to come on October 22nd, 1851. May not be well known. Should be well known, right? We should know this stuff. But I didn't realize he had convinced James and Ellen White. So I looked at the footnote. And do you know what the reference was for this claim? Nothing! No footnote! Like, where did you get this from? So I asked Michael and Greg over at Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast. Go give that a listen. If you haven't caught their first episode, came out on April 1. I asked Michael and Greg if they had heard anything about this. You know, I don't know everything. I know very little. Somebody more knowledgeable than me has to know something. And Greg shared some quotes with me that he had on hand, which I'm thankful for. So thank you, Greg. One was by Ellen White and printed in the Review, July 21, 1851, which is 3 months before Bates expected Jesus to come. Ellen White writes, quote, I saw that some were making everything bend to the time of this next fall. I saw that this was wrong, end quote. And then James White wrote, August 19th issue, just a few weeks later, in the Review, that some were teaching that Jesus would return in 1851, and then James offered 6 reasons why Bates was wrong, not by name, offered 6 reasons why these people were wrong to expect Jesus to return on October 22nd, 1851. So what does Daly mean when he says that Bates convinced James and Ellen that Jesus was going to return in 1851? Both James and Ellen are on record, not after the fact, but before the fact, denying that they believed it. So where is Daly's proof? Where's the footnote? Where's the footnote? Look, there's a chance I could be wrong, and I'm open to correction, but, you know, maybe he found something that nobody else found in Adventist history. I don't know, but it'd have to be something real powerful to prove his point. And it doesn't change the fact that he published a book asserting something without evidence to back it up. Maybe I missed something. I don't know. Time for another example. When Ellen White mentions that her family was kicked out of the Methodist Church for, in Ellen White's words, walking contrary to their rules, Daly scoffs. Quote, the Methodists were not opposed to members attending other churches. They were opposed to the Millerite meetings because of their unbiblical date setting. End quote. Unbiblical date setting? Is that your professional opinion as a psychologist, buddy? He goes on. Quote, she presents the case as if the Harmon family was unfairly persecuted. And Ellen fails to identify the meetings as Millerite, to mention the heretical date setting involved, or to own up to the very specific rules that they violated, such as trying to convert church members to Millerism, end quote. Heretical date setting? And he's not done yet. Remember, Jesus said no man knows the day or the hour of his return, right? Well, says Daly, quote, this should make it clear that date setting is a heresy and something that the Methodist Church was right to reject, end quote. A heresy? I am really confused. Is Steve Daly still trying to analyze Ellen White's mental state? Is he still trying to understand her personality? Or is he trying to argue theology with the woman? The Methodists were right to kick them out. their heretical date setting, their unbiblical date setting. I mean, he says it 3 times in 2 different ways in the span of a couple paragraphs. Like, notice that language he uses: unbiblical date setting, heretical date setting. Date setting is a heresy. Look, I'm not a psychologist, but I imagine using words like unbiblical and heresy are not in any psychological textbooks. Or is this what he calls a sprinkling of theological comments throughout his book? This is why, this is what I mean when I say that he uses this loaded language. You could have written something like, the Methodists believed in the second coming of Jesus, but rejected William Miller's date setting. Period. You could have written that, but adding the word heretical or unbiblical in there, and the author loads it down with his own personal meaning. And as you saw in this passage, he uses these words interchangeably over and over and over again. Well, he's got Matthew 25, right? That proves it. That just proves it. The Millerites never heard of Matthew 25. No one knows the day or the hour. Of course. And by the way, when he brings that text up and then he says the Millerites, their response to it was this, and he gets that wrong too. I don't want to get into it. Man, there's just so many different ways we could go. I've never seen a more judgmental mental health professional. His chief contention in this section is that the Harmon family received a letter from their Methodist church informing them that action would be taken against them if they didn't stop trying to convert the congregation to William Miller. And Ellen, writing decades later, simply says, among other reasons, that her family was kicked out for walking contrary to the church's rules. And Daly is horrified by what he sees as Ellen's deliberate deception. Ellen, in Daly's words, feigns ignorance of the letter that her family received in 1843 from the Methodist Church, which clearly outlined the reasons for which they were being kicked out. In raising the stakes, Daly calls this deliberate dishonesty on her part. Look, Ellen White was 15 when that letter was sent to her family, and she wrote about it later in her 30s. There are a number of plausible explanations for why Ellen White didn't acknowledge the letter. Option 1, because she was 15. Did you know everything going on in your parents' house at that age? When they received devastating news, did they explain it all to you? Daly is convinced that Ellen White knew of the letter outlining the reasons why her family was being kicked out of their church, and that she deliberately later on lied by inventing other reasons that made her family seem like martyrs. But we just don't know if she ever saw the letter. We just don't know that her parents ever told their 8 children about it, and that the 15-year-old would remember it decades later. There's another option. Maybe she did see the letter. So option 2, maybe Ellen White just saw things differently. She said she was kicked out for rejoicing at the thought of Jesus' second coming. Well, Daly scoffs at that too. As we've seen, the Methodists didn't have a problem with Jesus coming. They believed in the second coming. She was not kicked out for rejoicing in Jesus' return, but for trying to convert people to William Miller. Okay, but maybe for Ellen, rejoicing in the soon coming of Jesus was how she understood her participation in the Millerite movement. Because in her view, if you were really, truly excited for Jesus to return, you would join the Millerite movement. And the Methodists didn't. They discouraged her from doing so. So maybe on paper, maybe doctrinally, the Methodists believed in the second coming. But they sure didn't seem excited when tens of thousands of Millerite Christians were expecting Jesus to return in 1843 and 1844. So to many of these Millerites, the so-called formal churches showed that they didn't really want Jesus to return, or else they would have joined the Millerite movement. Okay? So perhaps when Ellen White later wrote that she was kicked out because of her joy in seeing the return of Jesus, this is what she meant. Now, certainly the Methodists saw it differently, but that doesn't mean Ellen was lying, okay? In the American South, John Brown was a terrorist when he tried to lead a rebellion and free the slaves. He was a terrorist. Now, the abolitionists in the North said that he was a freedom fighter. Who was lying? Well, neither side was trying to deceive us about John Brown. They just both interpreted his actions from a different point of view. For Ellen, I don't think she was lying when she said, that she was kicked out for rejoicing in the soon return of Jesus, because for her, rejoicing in the soon return of Jesus meant joining the Millerite movement. And when she was kicked out for joining the Millerite movement, to her, that felt like the Methodist Church didn't really want to see Jesus return. Okay, that I understand the Methodists would see that differently. Okay, but that doesn't mean she was lying. It just means that she interpreted it differently. She had a different perspective on the affair. That's not the same as lying. And this is representative of my problem with the tone of this book. It just skips over what I find to be more plausible explanations for Ellen White's behavior and just goes straight for the worst possible interpretations. I believe a biographer should afford their subject some charity and not ascribe to them the worst motives when better motives might equally explain a situation. Now, sadly, this toxic tone, this miserly hoarding of grace permeates the book. At the end of every chapter are questions, discussion questions. One question asks, quote, "If Ellen wasn't the God-chosen visionary prophet who could pontificate on almost every subject as she professed to be, was she really just a Pharisee?" End quote. Oh, okay. Sounds like a really great discussion, given that you've only given us like one proposed answer to that question, right? Was she or wasn't she a Pharisee? Oh, okay. Or my personal favorite at the end of chapter 3. Why are the vast majority of Adventists so grossly ignorant about their prophet's deficiencies, and how have they become people of the lie? End quote. What the heck is wrong with you, dude? You couldn't word this question more offensively if you tried. It reminds me of the old Colbert Report show where Stephen Colbert would ask guests if they thought George W. Bush was a great president or the greatest president, right? Like, those are your only two options that he gave them. And those are the only options you're giving your readers in chapter 2 and chapter 3. Like, why is Daly so reluctant to just lay the facts and the facts alone out without steering the reader, without prejudicing the reader from the very first pages to the conclusion he wants them to reach? And what's this about the vast majority of Adventists are people of the lie? What? Like, why? I mean, you could write thought-provoking questions. I mean, I don't mind if you want to raise tough questions about Ellen White. I don't mind if you want to present both sides, okay? You want to take the Mason thing, okay? Say, here's what people say about her. Here's what the church says in reply. Do you find the church's answer convincing? Why or why not? Okay, I don't mind. You want to structure it that way? That's fine. You can be skeptical of Ellen White. You can write from the outside. I'm not expecting you to I'm not angry. I'm not bothered because you don't agree with Ellen White. It's just, I hope you realize there's a way to be skeptical and yet kind of remain neutral without needlessly antagonizing the other side. Saying the vast majority of Adventists are people of the lie. Is there a scientific survey he did to come to that conclusion? I mean, it's just abrasive. It's antagonistic. It's petty. It's petty. And I am not happy to reach that conclusion. Okay, this book could have been a gift to all historians, to all people who are interested in Ellen White, if Daly had been more careful, more charitable, more professional. There are some interesting points in this book, including a few that piqued my curiosity, and I made notes in my book to follow up on them. But overall, I can't recommend this book to anyone in the same way I would recommend Ron Numbers' Prophetess of Health to those who really want to study Ellen White, okay? That doesn't mean I endorse, all of Numbers' conclusions, but I think on the balance, I would give it to somebody who's really wanting to understand the history of the health message, okay? All right, I've got to end this episode here. I know we spent a lot of time setting the table in this episode. My plan is we're going to pick it up again next month, talk about some of the more significant claims in this book. If you're reading the book and you have some questions, send them my way. I'll be happy to include them in the next episode. Some things you want me to answer or discuss or study. I just hope that you guys stay safe out there. I will see you next time, and please pray for me.